Hello and welcome to Digital India Dialogue. Today we are discussing ICT for Make in India, what the government needs to do and where the industry needs to walk the extra mile to convert India from the world's back office to world's manufacturing hub. It's a power-packed panel today to give us a 360-degree view on this very, very big issue. Joining me today is Mr. Sandeep Aurora, Director Marketing of South Asia Intel. Then we have Mr. Neel Ratan, Partner and Leader, Government and Public Sector, PwC. On my left, Mr. R. Chandrasekhar, President NASSCOM, and Mr. Nitin Kunkolinkar, Vice President MATE. Gentlemen, thank you so much for taking out the time. Mr. Chandrasekhar, my first question to you, as President of NASSCOM, you know how significant the impact that IT industry has. But at the level, if you talk about it, that as of now, we are not really a manufacturing hub, so to say. What do you think needs to be done to walk that extra mile to convert ourselves from the world's back office hub to really make ourselves world's manufacturing hub?
You know, it's interesting when you look back and see that post the liberalization of the economy in 1991, one sector really took off, which was IT.
Right.
And much of manufacturing and most of electronics actually receded. In fact, it not only didn't grow, it actually receded from where we were. So if you look at each of the elements that go into manufacturing, you look at, for example, infrastructure, the general infrastructure, power, water, all of the things which are required for manufacturing.
Right.
Then you look at capital, the cost of capital, and so on. Then you look at the logistics and the supply, especially in an area like electronics. You know, very easy and fast movement is important because this is a sector which moves with great speed. And most important of all, because electronics is a high volume, high velocity and low margin business. So the taxation makes a huge impact. Even a 2% differential in tax can actually make a difference between Make in India and Make in China.
Right.
And unless you attack each of these problems one by one, well, whether it is on taxation or financing or infrastructure, in electronics, I think we will not see the manufacturing until all of these
take off
are
in such a big way. Mr. Ratan, do you think the enablers need to be addressed by the government before actually expecting top dollar to come into India? Like, for instance, across the board, whether it is labor, land, power, taxes, across the board, those enablers have really not been addressed.
Absolutely, absolutely. As Mr. Chandrasekhar said as well, I think if you look at infrastructure, we can't really expect the private sector alone to deal with that. You need the government to either do it or creating a strong enabling environment via which that can be done. Labor laws, I think manufacturing inherently involves a fair amount of labor.
Right.
So that will need to be.
Unless you have easier labor laws.
Why would I set up a new manufacturing plant for which there is the sort of the strong driver or a necessity to manufacture in India does not exist.
Right.
The cost of importing from outside is not high, cannot be kept high in the current regime. So you need to be able to provide an incentive or at least a sort of level playing environment to manufacture in India. Just the demand being here does not alone help. So also I think this whole aspect of ease of doing business in India. That's another aspect which needs to be done, I think, because the difficulty to set up large electronic manufacturing in clusters where it's already happening is much lesser. So I have a large plant somewhere, I have a large plant in China, I have a large plant in Taiwan. For me to add capacity there is much easier today and it's far more difficult. So
greenfield here is a very, very tough.
Greenfield here becomes much more difficult, and what you're comparing typically is a greenfield in India with a brownfield or an expansion or somewhere where you already have the logistics. So the effort required is a little more by the government to actually move stuff to India. I think that's the thing which needs to be addressed.
Let me bring in Mr. Aurora right now on this issue as to ease of doing business. As an MNC, how difficult do you think setting up, or as he mentioned, you know, a greenfield here versus a brownfield overseas? Where do you strike the balance?
So we do a great deal of R&D work here in India, and I don't think we face any problems per se in that sense about, you know, the R&D work we do. Talent pool is huge. You know, the infrastructure in terms of the R&D per se is good. and the collaboration which an MNC like Intel can do between their centers in India and their centers outside, is huge.
But
so I don't think
set up a fab factory here. Let's look at it like that. That's manufacturing, right?
So from that fab standpoint, one is the semiconductor fab is a very, very complex process. Right. It's a greenfield on the one extreme, right?
Right.
And secondly, on the semiconductor side, right now there's an overcapacity worldwide, right? So I don't think anyone anywhere is building a fab worldwide right now.
Right.
But the fact, I think the point which Chandrasekhar made and points made here, I think fundamentally in my mind there are two things. When we say make in India, I think the first thing is the market big enough that people line up to make in India? I think comparable countries, our market size is still small, and I think when the initiative takes space, Digital India, I think the market size starts to grow, and it compels many players to start looking at manufacturing very differently than the current market size. Do you want to become a market where manufacturing is happening for internal consumption versus export? I think we need to decide that as a country. Because if once the market size reaches a certain stage, there is no other way but for people to start manufacturing here.
Right.
Second, I think role for ICT as such is not just manufacturing around ICT, not just electronics manufacturing, but how can ICT play a role? Information technology can play a role, technology can play a role in making manufacturing everything else easier.
Right.
And making it high quality, taking it a few notches up, making it design intensive versus labor intensive, right? So I think things like making sure we have the right skills in India, we are doing right kind of innovation on ground, that people are thinking about problems which can be solved in India for India through technology.
Right.
I think these are important factors as well, so that we realize this vision.
Right. Mr. Nitin, given our federal structure and the federal scheme of decision making,
Yes.
what the central government is deciding, and when it comes, the decision making trickles down, do you think that has an impact on investors and investment?
Absolutely. Today there is a complete disconnect. Like there is no special purpose vehicle created for promoting manufacturing in this country, and that's what government should come forward. Look at the side within one state, like for example each state, and there is a port. Port is controlled by central government. Railway is controlled by central government. Within railway there is Konkan Railway, there is South Central Railway, Western Railway, and so many differentiating factors, and they don't collaborate. There is no central agency within the state which collaborates. Center and state doesn't collaborate. So there has to be a proper agreement with the state, a mission created by the government, and the government should create special purpose vehicle on this, and that's where we are missing. On labor front, the policy of protection has to be replaced with a policy of promotion. So we can't keep on protecting. You won't believe this Section 25B of Industrial Dispute Act was enacted during emergency.
Right.
And we always agreed that emergency was one of the worst thing of our democracy.
Sure.
But that provision has remained.
Right.
We have not removed that.
Mr. Nitin, on that note, let's take a very short break. On the other side, we discuss how can India go ahead and blunt China's advantage in manufacturing, and are there any lessons to be learned from the recent China's economic crash? Welcome back to Digital India Dialogue. Mr. Chandrasekhar, if we were to talk about the huge advantage that China has in terms of manufacturing, what are the lessons that India can learn from it? And are there any, of course, decision making is a completely different exercise in China and in India, but are there any things that can be aped in India by policymakers?
I think we've talked about a lot of the problems, and we've also talked about some of the reasons why China succeeded.
Right.
And when we look at, what are the things which we have going for us, and what are the things that we need to do, we also need to look at how the game has changed. It's no longer the same game anymore.
Right.
And so there is, I don't think that, even if we were able to ape China successfully, not that it can happen because it's a very different system, but even if we were able to ape, we will probably not succeed in today's economy. Because if you look at the manufacturing, for example, a lot of it is automated today in the electronic segment.
Right.
And if you look at any product, electronics has become a bigger and bigger part. For the automotive sector, electronics was practically a negligible component.
Yeah.
It went to 10%, 20%, it's now 30%.
Right.
It's expected to reach 50%. And in electronics, the value addition is largely become in the software and in the design and in the embedded systems.
Right.
So the shifting nature of this game has a huge implication. The biggest advantage that we have is, as a country, our strength in IT is not just in IT services and back office.
Yeah.
We started with that,
Right.
but it's
We've
gone
moved
far
much ahead.
beyond that.
Yes.
We are now very major players in design, in engineering and prototyping and so on. Secondly, in this business, the products keep coming at a faster and faster pace. So not only the size of our market, but the proximity to this market, the ability to innovate rapidly because you have the design here, and to keep that cycle going at a rapid pace and build innovation, rapid prototyping, marketing, and then bring a virtuous feedback loop and come with newer and more efficient models would therefore be very high. So we need to build our strategy around the strengths that we have
and localize
and then
it more
localize
than
it.
more than ape the Chinese model.
Because there are inherent limitations in how far we can ape the Chinese model.
Right.
But definitely we do need to address the disabilities. But while on one hand addressing the disabilities on taxation and other things that we have talked about, to build a proactive strategy leveraging these strengths that we have, I believe will take us forward.
Mr. Ratan, would you like to come in on this?
No, absolutely. I think as Mr. Chandrasekhar said, I think the environment to foster innovation. I think that's a very, very, very critical aspect to try and make this work, because we will need to have our own USP. There will have to be a strong reason why somebody will come and manufacture in India. We lack that today. And that's very clear. So first, removing the basic problems, get GST in, get all the aspects required to do sort of easier business, doing business in India, in correct the inverted duty structure, in solve the infrastructure problem. Yes, I think these four are basics. If we don't do that, whatever else we do, manufacturing will be very difficult. I think also what we need to do is look at what do we want to manufacture. So what are the new age stuff likely to come?
Right.
So the whole embedded systems, the whole IoT thing which is going to come in, the whole 3D printers which is going to come in. So I think if we look at stuff where significant presence in manufacturing has not got established in other places, and leverage our skill base and sort of promote innovation, that could then solve the problem.
Mr. Nitin, I would like to bring you in on this as to what should be the top 5 things that India should focus on in an electronic manufacturing.
The demand, let's say for example in tablets, mobiles, the demand is increasing. That means the low-end, low-cost items are going to be in demand, huge demand, considering our population size. And it's impossible for anyone to guess what could be the size for next 10 years, what could be the products that would emerge. So, but the base is going to be same. We need to create an ecosystem. We need to create good hubs. We need to create good spokes. So hub and spoke model has to be built up in a country like India. We have identified transportation and all our challenges, but we need to create a system to build corridors. Today, cost of transporting goods from east to west are huge. Huge. Check post, Form 32 and all, way bills. I mean, which era we are living?
No, that's true.
At the same time, the same chief minister will come at the national level and say, you invest in my state.
I agree with you. Mr. Nitin, just one question. Mr. Aurora, how significant, he talked about in terms of octroi, transportation, we talked about inverted duty structure. As a global investor, how significant is GST for you to invest in India? If we were to talk about the importance of GST, how significant it is?
I think, as part of, when we talk about enablers, when we talk about enablers, and, Nitin mentioned, I think GST is one of them.
Right.
When you talk about ease of doing business, when you talk about moving things freely within the country, when you talk about, not worrying about where something is produced in the country and where it is being sold, making it a unified market, I think GST will go a long way. And I think fundamental thing GST will do is make the ease of doing business, take it forward. And then what that does is expands the market. And as the market expands, more players come in. You talked about what should we enable, as a product, right? For example, one of the basic things is if Digital India has to become a reality, each citizen has to get connected.
Sure.
Right? Absolutely. Without that, it's not a reality.
Right.
So what do we do to make sure that innovation is happening on ground and we are connecting each citizen and whatever it needs, whatever device form, whatever tools it takes, that should be a starting point.
Right. We'll take a very short break. On the other side, we'll discuss the impact that Make in India is having on job creation. Welcome back to Digital India Dialogue. Mr. Chandrasekhar, if the ultimate goal of the government is to ensure massive job creation, and how soon do you think it can really happen, given that at the end of the day, we still have to address basic skill issues in terms of manufacturing?
Well, I think the skill issues are there because, you need skills of a certain kind. And globally also there are shortage of certain kinds of skills. But I wouldn't overemphasize that in the context of manufacturing or electronics, because that is something which we have the ability as a country to rapidly upscale, because we have a very young population, and even in terms of highly skilled people, we have quite a large number. So if you compare ourselves globally, I think the imbalance in India is far more manageable. And we do have a skilling program, and if we can ramp that up, then that's a solvable problem. But like you were saying in the beginning, if you look at some of the major items of consumption, you look at mobile phones, you look at things like tablets, if they are linked with an education policy which encourages people to use tablets, and at today's price points, it's quite possible that you may actually lower the cost, not increase the cost, as some people may think. If you combine it with the way in which textbooks are produced and distributed, the way material is sent around, you have to look at each of these segments. You look at healthcare and how you can improve access in remote areas. So in each of these areas, or set-top boxes in the case of cable television, so there are at least a dozen items which are very high volumes running into hundreds of millions, which would be the envy of any manufacturing location. So then, for at least keeping those as a reference point, if we then start addressing the issues that we have just been discussing systematically, and build a strategy and build on our strengths, I think then we will actually see a lot of traction.
Mr. Aurora, we talked about how manpower is in abundance in India, but skill is not. How does the government marry Skill India, Digital India, Make in India to arrive at a solution?
So I think, the two big pillars, we are working on with Digital India is, one is, the skills part, digital skills, and the innovation part. And I think skills have to be seen in a different light. We used to talk about literacy, and we still, come out with literacy figures saying this is the percentage population which is literate. I think we need to move that needle to digital literacy, because if the future generation is not digitally literate, India will lose its competitiveness worldwide. So I think we need to make sure that we are not just making our kids, our children literate, our next generation literate, but digitally literate, right? And we need to, keep that, taking a few notches up every year, so that the skill level keeps on going up. And I think the second thing is, when that happens, then automatically people start to innovate. When they know technology is not something to be afraid of, when they know technology is an enabler, then they start to look at it as a friend, as a mentor, as a guide, and then they start looking at innovations. And India has been a country of innovations, for a long time. It's just that, we don't do very well in terms of clubbing our innovation and scaling them. And I think once we start doing that, we can become the benchmark for innovation for all the emerging markets worldwide. Why not?
Mr. Ravan, how soon do you think this can happen?
See, if you look at creating jobs in Digital India, I think if that's the question, the job creation using Digital India can happen fairly soon.
Electronic manufacturing, yes.
I think with manufacturing, I think it is still a little distant.
Electronic manufacturing, how far away are we from job creation there?
I think there the issue is, once manufacturing happens, then job gets linked to that. If you are saying it's linked only from that standpoint, and there the issues to resolve are still many. So we need to sort that out. So I don't think we are going to the stuff we've done till now, or the pace at which the change is happening, significant shift to the extent required in terms of demand shifts which are happening in India and stuff like that will happen unless we do something significant, sort of something drastic about that. I mean, use that word. And if that happens, then yes, manufacturing can happen. The market is there. I actually believe the skill. Yeah, I think we may not have the right skills, but I think we at least have the people who can do the manufacturing in India, which is a shortage in many other parts of the world as well. But I think the other part, can technology and digital and employment from there in various other forms, sort of across various sectors, whether it is health, whether for innovation, for startups, for sort of, that's I think a huge market which can be addressed straight away. So I would say the benefit of electronics manufacturing in India, job creation is definitely there, but I think saving of foreign exchange is probably a far bigger benefit
than anything else.
So that's the biggest driver. So jobs is there's an automatic benefit which you will get, but that should be the sort of the driver for us to get it fast.
Right. Mr. Ratan, your thoughts on value addition? That's again a key area of concern.
Yeah. So value addition, definitely India has a potential. As Sandeep also said, we need to create a base not only for the domestic consumption but for also exports. We have a very strong case for it. No big multinational would come and transfer technology and people just for the sake of Indian market. Probably we need to look at emerging markets like Africa, Middle East, and there's a huge potential. We need to develop the western part of our country. Logistically, I mean on logistic front they could get closer. We need to invest in shipping. Now, value add can be only if we are going for assembly based units. We need to start with assembly in this country to begin with and make components available, create a component trading hub. Today getting components probably is difficult. At least some of these multinational chip manufacturers can stock and sell within the country, which will make these components available to the assemblers. So we need to grow this assembly section to begin with a phased manufacturing program that every year they could gradually move towards high value. So plastic, today for example in electronics there is a substantial component of mechanical, electromechanical or plastic components that could be developed in this country. There is absolutely no problem. But government has to give an incentive. Even today in India there is a spare capacity. Enough capacity is available at least to take off. But government has to incentivize. That's not happening. Today you have given benefit for the mobile manufacturers. Mobile manufacturers are only, many of the mobile manufacturers are getting only SKD. So that whatever revenue that is sacrificed by the government is going waste. So you need to allow this at a component level, not at a SKD level.
So the general consensus really is that the government needs to walk the extra mile. So the industry is very clear. Unless and until government addresses some of the key enablers, which include land, labor, taxation, some of the other teething problems, unless and until those are addressed, India really cannot convert itself to a manufacturing hub, and Make in India might just end up being a pipe dream.